Hello again. Sorry about that. Okay, so we were here talking about the it is possessive, and there doesn't need to be an apostrophe here because that would indicate it is, right? All right. Um, since the 1980s, the amount of people being worked through the legal system from prison time to probation has more than tripled in number. This increase is shown, right? Look up the this is just something, if you are using the helping verb is with show, then you need to use shown as the verb instead of show. You would use show. This increase is to show, right? That would be where you can just use show, but here it has to be shown to be most prominent from both the federal and state prison level for both violent and drug-related crimes, each tallying in more than half of their total incarcerated. Okay, this paragraph is unclear simply because what is your larger point? Is your larger point we have more people incarcerated than ever before? If so, just say that in your topic sentence. And then you can use your fact from this chart to indicate, look, here's some proof. But this is the part that I feel most unsure about. You do tell us that the amount has tripled, and you do look at since when it's tripled, but then I'm unsure how you're analyzing it. Does this indicate that the war on drugs should end? If so, why? Answering it simply in terms of, okay, so how does this connect to my topic sentence and how does this connect to my thesis statement will really guarantee that you're being clear. Where here, I think you know what it is you're trying to say, but the reader is unsure. So clarification there would be great. Let's go move on to the war on drugs is the cause of the increased rate of women being incarcerated. Excellent. You're going to look at how the war on drugs is really the primary reason for women being incarcerated at a higher rate now than in the 80s, or than ever before. The number of women being incarcerated has increased at a rate of 50% higher than men since 1980. Then that means that's your entire paragraph. That's everything you're going to look at. In 1980, there were 13,000 women in state and federal prison, but recent in 2013, there were 104,000 women in state and federal prisons. These women have histories of physical and sexual abuse, high rates of HIV, and substance abuse problems. Based on the fact that many of these women have a history of substance abuse, it means that most of them were arrested for drug use, possession, and it really should be and or. That's just a stylistic thing. It's not and or selling drugs. A couple of grammatical things, but recent, it should be recently, right? Based on the fact, when you're using phrases like based on the fact, since the fact, ever since the fact, right? That indicates that there needs to be a comma after you're done with that clause. So after your based on the fact clause is done, there needs to be a comma. So let's see when you're done referring to what the based on the fact is referring to. So based on the fact that many of these women have a history of substance abuse, comma, it means that most of them were arrested for drug use, possession, and or selling drugs. Hopefully that was clear. That's something that we'll talk about more as the semester unfolds. This idea of a dependent clause starting your sentence means that when the dependent clause is finished, there needs to be a comma, and then the independent clause can begin. The United States has emphasized criminalization over health when it comes to drugs. Great, again, that means you're going to focus on criminalization over health. This is especially true for women. A large amount of women who do drugs are drawn to them by serious problems they've experienced, past tense, such as physical and sexual abuse. Incarcerating these women is only causing women to do more drugs when they are released. Unlike the US, Portugal, now again, singular Portugal means the verb should be in singular form. Now, do is different, right? If you want to put it in singular form, you can't just add an S to do. You have to use the special form of present tense singular do, which is does. Portugal does not imprison people for doing drugs, but instead create programs designed to help people who are addicted. This was proven to be effective since incarceration rates in Portugal are significantly low. When you're comparing two things, it should indicate that lower compared to the United States, and drug addicts are being helped. Some are even quitting. Great. So this is looking at the way in which criminalization can really cause women to become victims in two ways. First, they're victims because they're already vulnerable to drug abuse. Second, they're vulnerable to drug abuse and they're not being treated. Instead, they're being put in jail, which makes them vulnerable to reoffend and not quit their drug of choice. Fabulous. The war on drugs should end because too many people are getting unfair sentences. Great. The number of life sentences has grown because of the increase in drug offenses. The majority of people currently serving life sentences are Black. According to Nadelman, the war on drugs has been a method used to target specific races. For instance, in the lockdown, Alexander states that getting a small drug offense can force you to take a plea deal because you are getting a public defender. Taking a plea deal will help avoid getting an unnecessary sentencing. People's lives are valuable, and the war on drugs are ruining their lives by giving them unfair sentences. What I like about this is you try to connect three sources, which is a huge task to take on. For your literature review, this is going to be a really great skill that you've uncovered here, connecting three sources because of their similar approach or their similar stance on something. What I think could use more work is when you quote Nadelman here, or when you talk about Nadelman as having said the war on drugs targets specific races, it could have been useful, or it is useful, to explain where he says that, how he says that, report what he says, right? And then explain further how we get from that quote or that stat that Nadelman really does think the war on drugs targets specific races. In the same way, you sort of explain Alexander in a few sentences so that we hear what she says, and then you explain how what she says is related to your topic sentence or your introductory statement as well. All right. The war on drugs should end because it is more of a race problem than a drug problem. The reason why I've bolded this is because the way that this is phrased makes it seem as though you are saying, we don't need a war on drugs. We do need a war on race. And I don't necessarily think that's what you meant. So you want to just clarify that for your readers. Otherwise, they can really think you're saying something totally opposite from what you intended. According to the data from the Sentencing Project, the rate of incarceration for Black people are double than any other race, which led to believe that the government that is enforcing the drug policies are possibly targeting the minority than the majority. Phrasing here. The rate of incarceration for Black people are double. The way that it's phrased here is just unclear. The way that I would revise this, though, is the rate of incarceration for Black people is more than double any other race, which led who to believe? Which leads U.S. citizens to believe that the government that is enforcing the drug policies are now, who is this "are" referring to? The government, right? The government is one singular entity. So the government that is enforcing the drug policies is possibly targeting the minority rather than the majority. Even though the drug users are incarcerated, it does not help stop using. It does not help who stop using. I think you might want to really review use of pronouns and use of comparative language, right? So when you're saying something is more than double, this person did this person rather than doing this did this, there's a way that you have to sort of phrase it, and you want to be clear on how that is. In addition to incarceration rates from the Sentencing Project cause of anti-drug policies, there is a higher chance of Blacks and Hispanic to become incarcerated. This sentence is unclear to me. In addition to incarceration rates from the Sentencing Project, so you're saying the Sentencing Project talks about incarceration rates, but there's also something else I want to talk about from the Sentencing Project, and that something is that there is a higher chance of Blacks and Hispanics to become incarcerated. So this part right here is really unnecessary. And then all of a sudden it makes more sense. There is some more revision you can do, but for now this makes at least sense. The likelihood of imprisonment for Black men is 1 in 3, while for white men it is 1 in 17, which the difference in imprisonment is greater based off race. Again, this part, what are you saying there? Clarify. So you're comparing the likelihood of imprisonment, which is great because it does go back to your topic sentence about Black and Hispanics being more likely to be incarcerated, but I'm unsure of what you're saying when you say the difference in imprisonment is greater based off race. That needs to be clarified. Sentencing policies during the war on drugs era effectively increased the drug arrest. Now again, multiple arrests, right? There's not just one, so you need to pluralize, which led to growth and incarceration. Which clauses? They don't need commas to separate if it is preceded by an independent clause. Sentencing policies during the war on drugs era effectively increased the drug arrest. That sentence could stand on its own, which means you don't need to have a comma separating this from the dependent clause that follows, led to growth and incarceration. That can't stand on its own. So again, this is independent, this is dependent, and one of the rules of sentence structure is if you have an independent clause and then a dependent clause, there doesn't need to be a comma separating the two. According to the Sentencing Project, in 1980, over 40,000 individuals were incarcerated in prisons or jails related to drugs and increased more than 10 times in 2013. Sentencing laws play a big role in the result of this. According to the article, they have mandatory minimums that keep people convicted of the drug offense. In order for this number of individuals to decrease over the years, the policies need to be fixed. This is good. According to the chart, I would put chart instead of article. What I'm trying to see, in order for this number of individuals to decrease over. See, for me, this sentence is strong in that it's you reflecting, but it's also weak in that you don't really explain more about how the policies could be fixed. So I'm sort of stuck. I don't want to say that this is wrong because it's not, but if you were to revise it, I would recommend creating more sentences that indicate how these policies should be fixed, perhaps even making a different paragraph to talk about it. All right. In the lockdown, Alexander argues that the war on drugs has contributed to the mass incarceration of Black people, leading to the increase in federal inmate population. Now, if this is your introductory statement, it leads me to believe that you are going to really just look at Alexander, which is not necessarily the case, mostly because we know you had a chart that you had to look at. So, what I would do is the war on drugs has contributed to the mass incarceration of Black people, leading to the increase in federal inmate population. This way, you can use Alexander later on as support. It is reported in the Sentencing Project that the majority of this comma is unnecessary. And remember, majority, it's a specific majority, that the majority of people serving life sentences are Blacks. That is important. So the people who are serving these life sentences are Black. You're using it as an adjective, not as a noun. That is approximately 47% Blacks as compare, past tense, to 34 white. Even though the war on drugs is supposed to get rid of the big time drug dealers, this is not what is happening now. It is rather incarcerating first time offenders, not for big crimes, but minor ones. Majority of the majority of the jailers are facing prison terms for minor crimes such as marijuana possession, and few are facing terms for marijuana sales. According to Sentencing Project chart, the number of people serving life sentences continues to grow even while serious violent crime has been declining. This is because police are making unlawful arrests and prosecuting people, especially Black people, for minor crimes like marijuana possession that could have ended in probation or dismissal. But guess what? They ended up in prison serving life without parole. The guess what part goes to tone. You don't need that. Meaning, like, it seems as though it's very informal. Again, approximately 34,000 people were serving life sentences in 84, and as of 2012, the number has increased. A huge increase. So it's not any huge increase, it's this specific huge increase that you just talked about, right? So the huge increase is due to the introduction of the war on drugs. I quite like this paragraph because I feel as though you're doing a lot of reflection when you're talking about how the war on drugs and this increase in life sentencing is all related to race and, prosecuting a specific race of people. I just wonder if you had the time, you could really divide some of this information into separate paragraphs so you can explore them even further, especially when you talk about the low crime dealers versus the high level drug dealers. How would it be more effective if we stopped arresting low time or low level drug dealers and started arresting big time drug dealers? I think that's a really interesting point that you make that you could elaborate on even further. Okay, so that's it. This is part two. This is the conclusion of part two. If you have any questions, there are two things you can do. You can email me, or you can comment in the section on the YouTube page labeled comments. Make sure you keep it civil, of course. I have no doubt that you will. But so yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to utilize any of those approaches. If not, I will see you all the way next week on Wednesday, where your summary will be due by 11:59 p.m. Bye.